What's up? Welcome to a new episode of Movie Schmovie. This is episode number 359. My name is Steve. I'm one of the co-hosts, and as always, I'm joined by
Ron
and John.
Guys, how you doing?
Pretty good.
Good. Both of you good?
Pretty good. Just saw a couple of crazy trailers. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I was saying what also is pretty good at this time of the day was those two trailers that came out of the Comic-Con of Brazil, or I don't know what the official name of it is, but
I like the Comic-Con of Brazil. It sounds like you put it in Google Translate, and it's like the Comic-Con of Brazil.
This is the Comic-Con of Brazil. Yeah, that's what the translation is. No, I can't remember what it's called. I feel bad now, but yeah, it's like that's what everybody's referring to it as on Twitter. Disney had a big presence. I'm actually looking it up to see what it's actually called. Today they had a big announcement, a lot of footage, some guest stars.
Ronald, I bet you $50,000 it's called the Comic-Con of Brazil.
I would love that.
All right,
like the south of France.
No, wait, I don't bet you that. I take
So it's called CCXP. It's Brazil Comic-Con. So I mean, it's not far off.
Pretty close.
Shit, man, I shouldn't have gotten scared. That technically I could have argued.
You should have sat down on that.
You should have bet them 500,000 credits.
I'd be sitting on 50 large right now if I had stuck with my guns there.
So Disney's got a big presence there, and beyond other appearances, news. They talked about Mandalorian season 3 coming out. Season 3?
Yep.
Yeah, season 3 coming out in March. And the big talk today before it actually dropped was that they would be debuting trailers for Indiana Jones, the new Indiana Jones film, which we did get a trailer for, and it's called Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And also a trailer for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. There was speculation that they'd be premiering there. Whether or not they'd be posted publicly online was the question. Yeah. So a part of the day I was like, am I going to have to watch like a leaked version of these trailers? But just right on the bat, like as they debuted there, it seems like they made them online and were released publicly right after one another. We got our first looks at the new Indiana Jones movie. Let's start here real quick. Go around what you guys think of this trailer for Dial of Destiny.
I think that the previous two Indiana Jones, it's almost like they forgot what made Indiana Jones special. And this trailer it's almost like whoever wrote this, was really a big fan of the first couple Indiana Jones, and it feels special like those did. It feels like a sense of urgency. Indy looks like he's really in trouble, you know what I mean? And regardless of what he's doing in the movie, it doesn't feel that crazy to me. Like that's the cool part about it. It feels a little grounded. It feels like he has bad knees but can still do really cool stuff, and I love that. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an Indiana Jones guy. I mean, I was watching this trailer realizing that the reason I'm excited about movies like this is because of movies like this,
Yes.
I grew up with Indiana Jones and Star Wars and all that stuff. And that's the reason why I have such a place in my heart for these big populist popcorn movies that get you going. That's why it's like I've said this before about you feel sort of, the Beatles are one of my favorite bands. Star Wars is one of my favorite movies, growing up with just good pop culture. And when something is that kind of mainstream and that good, it really has a place. You guys might remember I had an Indiana Jones poster on the wall down here. So, I mean, obviously that was a nostalgic move for me in my basement. That wasn't something that I thought, no, this is suitable for framing. But in a way it is. And I think Indiana Jones has this kind of special quality to it. I would maintain that really only the last Indiana Jones movie was the one that lost a little bit of the verve, Ronald. The Last Crusade is, I think, highly regarded by most people that like the character and
I'm thinking that I thought that 2 came out after that. I thought that that's just a monkey skull or
it's a Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But I mean,
I think a monkey worked in there. Yeah, you got a monkey in there somehow.
But as far as what you said about it feeling grounded, I mean, this movie looks like it might be getting into some crazy stuff. We don't know what it is yet. Yeah, and there's talk of like time travel or some kind of stuff like that.
Really cool.
I think The Dial of Destiny is exactly the kind of pulpy title that I was sort of hoping it had. There was rumor going around that this might be called Indy or might be called Indiana Jones. And though I liked that because it kind of fit with the sort of Logan aspect of James Mangold, who directed Logan, coming over and saying, like, we're going to do this sort of, I mean, no one's really saying Indiana Jones dies yet, but people are saying this is the send off. Harrison Ford isn't coming back. There's talk of handing the franchise in some way to Phoebe Waller-Bridge, like not recasting Indiana Jones, the character, but keeping that lore going. So I think that this, by its nature, feels like what you said, Ronald. They're trying to make a special movie. Bringing in the guy that made Logan, to me, is a real move towards saying, yes, we are sort of taking this seriously, as what might be the last time we see this actor in this role. I think the fact that it then has a super pulpy name, it just really made me smile. And I think the trailer itself, outside of a couple of digital, like there's some compositing in the scene with Harrison Ford on the horse running down the street. There's a part where he like turns his head where it looks like a digitally inserted face of Harrison Ford on like a CGI model. But outside of that, there's some de-aging and different things going on in this that look really cool, and the chases look like they're going to be exciting. And I've just heard too many things about all their efforts to make this thing special. I know I'm believing the hype when I say I kind of believe they tried to make something special, and it looks like it looks like it might be that. So yeah, as a young fan of this character, you know, in my heart to this day, I kind of hope this gets a little bit of that magic back, Ronald, that you're talking about. That just feels good and feels exciting and feels like a blast of adrenaline, which is what you expect when you hear the name Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I mean, it just something feels special about the trailer. I mean, I've heard a lot of very positive things about the movie so far, just like in trade stuff from some people I follow, and some test screenings and whatnot. But you know, you look at the cast, you look again, like John mentioned, we were going on our text thread. Like I couldn't believe how good some of the de-aging looked. And it's kind of something that's been going around since the trailer dropped about like how great the de-aging looks. And I'd even mentioned in our thread, like, and the movie's still 6 months out. You know, this comes out on June 30th. So, I mean, I'm sure they're still doing some post-production cleanup and things like that. So maybe even the part that you're talking about maybe looks a little better, hopefully, with the horse and whatnot. But just in general, though, I just think the scope looks awesome. You know, seeing Harrison Ford, like, you know, he has these moments, you know, as these iconic characters. And when it works, it's just like really few things compare to it. Especially, you know, if you are an Indiana Jones fan, you know, the fact that, you know, you see John Rhys Davies in it again, and, you know, and you see him in these movies. And at least for me, you know, it's like, you know, he's in two of the great ones, and, you know, to see him pop back up, and beyond that, like just new faces, you know, the fact that I don't even think we saw, and maybe briefly try to confirm this, but whether you saw Antonio Banderas' character in the trailer or not.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That was him. Okay.
I think we got a glimpse of him. We got a glimpse of Toby Jones.
Yeah, and then Boyd Holbrook and
Mads Mikkelsen.
Yeah, I mean, just what an awesome cast. And like you mentioned, like, you know, James Mangold, like, you know, he's been just knocking it out of the park recently. So I just feel like Spielberg picking him to take this on and to kind of finish this, you know, with Harrison is just, it just all looks good and it feels good. And I just feel like they know they got something here. And I think it's going to just knock it out of the park this summer. I can't wait to see it. Yeah. But yeah, it looks great. Absolutely great.
And let's just say a little bit about what we know about the plot, just very quickly. I think 1969, backdrop of the moon landing, Indiana Jones is sniffing around some Nazi scientists that are working for NASA. Mads Mikkelsen is a Nazi scientist working for NASA who like is in a race with Indiana Jones apparently to get to some artifact that Mads Mikkelsen said his character wants to repair the problems of the past or fix the mistakes of the past and thinks he knows how to make the world a better place. And Indiana Jones is trying to stop him from finding this thing. That just makes, I mean, I just get little tingles when I hear that kind of story, but I think setting it I think aging up the character, bringing it in nearly to 1970, that's already interesting, picturing Indiana Jones in those days. But also just the whole Nazi scientist at NASA, that's just such a fun, I mean, I hate to say, I know these movies are sort of guilty of making Nazis part of a pulpy fun movie, but that's just such a fun extension of the other movies and gives it some continuity. And Mads Mikkelsen is perfect to play that kind of what's going on with this guy. He seems smart, but there's something under the hood. You know, I just think I'm just so encouraged by that. Like, I like that idea of the character, and as much as I don't like the compositing in the horse riding down the city street, I think the idea of Indiana Jones on a horse in a subway tunnel in New York is just kind of like, okay, that's awesome. That just seems like they're gonna have fun with bringing him further into the modern age than we've ever really seen him.
Yeah, and you mentioned Mads again, just like dude's just going for the full set of like a villain in every possible IP franchise that exists in Hollywood now. So
that's my Hannibal.
Kudos, buddy.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. The other one we wanted to briefly discuss was the trailer drop for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which is coming out in May, just a month before.
Got us crying already.
Why? Why do they do this to us? I mean, why? I showed Erin the trailer. I've watched it a few times, and I showed her, and like immediately she's like, looks up at me from the TV, is like, that's not going to happen, right? And I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, it looks like it, but
we're not going to get Baby Rocket and Dead Rocket in the same movie.
In a movie. Come on, guys. Come on, James.
Also, you get a quick a quick glimpse of what I've been talking to you guys about this forever with the character of Rocket Raccoon, that he has a little otter girlfriend in the comics, Lila or Lilla. I think it's Lila, but it's Lylla. She popped up in that trailer, and she looked pretty much on model from the drawings in the comics. I mean, it was really this whole thing they're doing with combining the potential of Rocket's background, how he became what he is, with other sort of animals that are like him, mixed with these characters who seem to be half human, half animal, and a villain who the High Evolutionary is rumored to be the villain. And that character in the comics, what he did all the time was like create a new race of animal people to create the perfect organism, and then decide they weren't good, and then he would either enslave or kill everything just created. But he's constantly like toying with planets and entire races of people that way. So if they tie in like Rocket's origin with that kind of guy, I just feel like James Gunn clearly has always had a soft spot. He's always said Rocket was the character he relates to the most. He said he's bringing the story he wanted to tell to an end with this movie. We know he's not just leaving the Guardians franchise. He's leaving Marvel at the end of this. So I think that's part of why, as you said, Steve, why are they doing this to us? That's part of what James Gunn does, is like he will go for the heart and the laugh and everything a little bit harder than most people will. And him saying, I'm going to bring my trilogy to a close, I just feel like he's not going to do that without leaving a mark. And I don't think everybody's going to be gone, but I think when they say this is the last movie with this team in it, I don't think they just mean, the team breaks up at the end. I think they mean like some of these actors, like, for instance, Dave Bautista has said after this, he's done. So if you have that, why would you not make use of that narratively and really go for it? So, I've been waiting to see them explore Rocket's background. I just love the idea in both these cases. I love the idea that we have a Guardians movie and an Indiana Jones movie that seem like they might be, it's just that feeling. We were talking about these movies not feeling so special lately. And I think between Quantumania and Guardians, it feels like Marvel is really heading towards something really fun and exciting. And it's fun to see Indiana Jones kind of join in that group of like, oh wait, people are actually getting excited. People stopped for 2 seconds making jokes about Harrison Ford being old and actually got excited about this movie. And I think that's, I don't know, in both cases, I'm excited for some popcorn, like heartstring plucking fun.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And again, he's never at a loss for a good song either. I love the In the Meantime for the trailer. Oh, it's great.
Perfect.
So not much else to say about it. It looks great. I mean, obviously we're all very excited for that.
I mean, we're hyped up. We're saying it. We're believing the hype. Right now we're doing the fun part of the hype is getting the first glimpse, but these were good first glimpses.
All right, let's pivot over to required viewing. John, you want to intro your choice for this week?
I was just thinking about a movie that I have probably watched maybe on cable when I was a kid. My mom was real big about making sure I saw important movies or movies she thought were important. And as I watched this movie, The Ladykillers from 1955, I saw all the little things about it that had made its way into my cultural understanding as a kid. But I don't know that I had ever watched this movie. I knew that it was a movie that featured an early performance from Peter Sellers in a not major role, but a a secondary role. And I knew that Alec Guinness, who I loved as Obi-Wan, I sort of grew up knowing that there were all these movies he made in the 40s and 50s that were really what he was known for, and what he wished he was remembered for is that stuff, and not Obi-Wan. But I don't know. I think this movie had an extra place in my heart because when the Coen Brothers remake came out, there was so much talk about how it missed the mark of what this movie managed to do. That it kind of had this legendary status in my mind of, oh, that's one worth revisiting because it sounds like one of those old movies, again, 1955, that might feel kind of modern when you watch it, or that might at least remind you of a modern comedy when you watch it. And I have to say that feeling was carried out for me. I mean, it feels like a 1955 movie, but I enjoyed the humor and the kind of black comedy of what the characters were trying to do. And I thought it was fun to see Alec Guinness. I mean, from the first time he pops up on screen, he's playing similar to what Tom Hanks is doing in the remake, a sort of grotesque man. He's got these exaggerated teeth. His hair, which like should be kind of rakish and cool, instead looks kind of stringy and lank. And it just, everything about the character is like a twisted parody of the sort of protagonist you would normally have in a kind of bank heist thriller type movie, the kind of cool guy that you want to see weasel his way out of things. Instead, this guy's just gross. And I just think it's fun seeing Alec Guinness embrace the humor of that. That feels, again, like a very modern idea, a leading actor who is playing a comic grotesque with that level of energy. So yeah, I enjoyed watching this, but I also just felt I felt the kind of cultural imprint of it. I've seen and heard references to this story in this movie so much. It was fun to watch it with modern eyes and see how it held up. What did you think, Ronald?
I think, well, one of the things I really like about watching movies of that age is like the pace of speaking in movies is so different. It's like faster in a way that there's like a rhythm to it. Yeah. And that combined with the camera work and how silly this group of guys were. I mean, I loved how different each one was. And they all, obviously, they made them kind of different for very specific reasons. I mean, I kept kind of leaning towards the Oath character. It's just kind of a interesting.
What's his name? One Round?
One Round. And he didn't like to be called One Round, but they call him One Round again, and then he'd be okay with it.
Right.
Yeah, it's just that kind of. I liked him, man. Like, and
he was the sweetest one too. He was the one who liked the little old lady. We should say to anyone who didn't watch this movie and doesn't know, it's basically the story, if you know the Tom Hanks Coen Brothers movie, but it's the story of a little old lady who rents a room in her boarding house that I don't know what you call that, just a house where she's letting out rooms to a guy, Professor Marcus, who she thinks is like an erudite man of the arts who claims to be working with like a musical ensemble that's practicing. And they come into his apartment and they practice, but each one of the men is actually part of a crew that is planning a bank heist. And they're using the little old lady's house as a place to stage all this stuff. And, so they're pretending to be a band that's practicing classical music as she sort of falls for that and then gradually gets embroiled in their heist and how that happens. But the Ladykillers title comes from when they decide it's time to off the old lady. And that sets up a series of events where they all get taken out one by one. And I think that's all I knew about this movie as a kid was, the crooks they try to kill the old lady and then they end up dying one by one.
Right.
It takes a while for that to happen, but I do think the sort of absurdity, like you said, Ronald, the silliness of, they're kind of playing it straight, but in this weird way, the characters are so slapdash and just poorly organized. It was like one of those farces where characters are running in and out of a situation and you're having to kind of keep track of who's where. And gradually it's like, oh, 1 down, oh, 2 down, oh, 3 down.
That's like probably what I had never seen this before. And I feel like I'd only ever heard of it when the Coen Brothers film came out. Just, not so much as, and I guess hearing about it in a positive way, since that film from them wasn't so well received. But I think that's probably some of the stuff that works best for it, with this being the first time I'd ever seen it, was like that kind of like when things start to happen in the back half or back third of the film, when they start kind of offing each other one by one, it does become one of those, like, you're curious to see how they're going to fall. Like, they're falling apart, somehow in this movie, this little old lady is going to get away with something that she kind of has stumbled into or that they've brought to her feet. But it's kind of like when it starts to take apart the group one by one, that's where it kind of becomes. I just found like it was just very entertaining, like it really kind of stepped up when the movie gets to that point. I mean, even beyond that, though, yeah, I mean, just like the performances are great. I just feel like the setup of the movie is so well handled. For a movie that's only like, I think, isn't it only like 90 minutes?
Yeah.
It's like all the little breadcrumbs through the movie, in terms of where she lives and the relationship with the police and like, her reputation that she has with the police.
Her leaving her umbrella even becomes a running
all
gag.
that stuff. Yeah. It's so well placed with so little time to kind of like just lay it all out so that when it kind of does ramp up towards the end of the movie and you start seeing them drop like flies, when you get to that last, few minutes of the movie, it just all kind of felt right. It's like the comeuppance that these guys get for what they tried to do. It's pretty dark and but it's very funny. And yeah, I'm not super familiar with this, like the Ealing films, and I was reading a little bit more about that era after having watched it. But I probably need to try to find some of the standouts from there and watch some more of these, because this is the kind of thing that I just feel like I don't watch enough of, in my day to day and in this new world, that like there's so much to watch, and it's just like these things I would have never watched this movie had it not come up on this portion of the show. So this is like a nice thing that's like, I don't think this would have ever crossed my radar otherwise.
Yeah.
But it was really enjoyable though.
Just, you mentioned the Ealing films.
Yeah.
This we should say this was a product of the Ealing Studios, which was a London-based studio that had been around for a while, but in the post World War II years, like that following decade, roughly through the mid to late 50s, they were known for producing this particular kind of, I mean, people say it's related to kind of the British national spirit after World War II, but it's this kind of stiff upper lip with a bit of fatalism thrown in, black comedies.
Right.
But the other movies you mentioned, the standouts. In advance of this conversation, I was so intrigued by Ladykillers, I went ahead and rewatched one that I'd seen as a kid, Kind Hearts and Coronets, which is incredible. Has one unfortunate use of a certain word in it, but I think it's culturally different from what you might expect from the way it's being used, but still it kind of like, oh, that would be nice not to have that in there. But also the movie The Lavender Hill Gang, I think that's the name of it, Lavender Hill Mob, is also very funny, and it also stars Alec Guinness, and is a great example of how movies in those days, they could show you someone who seemed like they were going to get away with a crime, but just the nature of movies back then was they always had to show you that crime didn't pay at the very end, in some way.
Yeah.
This movie luckily takes care of that by having everybody kill each other in the Ladykillers. In the Lavender Hill Mob, they have to do a different thing to sort of say that. But no, those films and a few others are yes, they're the standouts from this era, that decade of Ealing Studios, and people say the Ealing comedies, and they're referring specifically to this relatively short list of movies that had kind of that dark humor, a satirical edge, a little bit like a broader comedy maybe, but also in some ways a more character-based thing. So an interesting mix of things. So I would say, yeah, Steve, if you're interested in going further, Kind Hearts and Coronets and the Lavender Hill Mob would be the other two I would say you got to jump on. But no, I think it's interesting too that in this movie we don't just get young Peter Sellers, we also get Herbert Lom, who played Dreyfus in the Clouseau films. So you get young Clouseau and young Dreyfus. And if you've seen the Pink Panther movies, you know that Dreyfus is his long-suffering supervisor. Well, that guy plays Louis in this, or Lewis, who is probably the darkest, the most legit of the crooks. And yet he still doesn't quite have what it takes. But, he seems like he's the most serious-minded of the whole bunch, who, if they were all more like him, maybe this group wouldn't have ended up in such a bad situation. But we really haven't talked about Miss Wilberforce yet. I think that's an interesting performance at the heart of this movie, because she kind of, half the movie is sort of like the dingbat, who doesn't know what's going on. And then she kind of knows what's going on, but still doesn't quite know the extent of it. But in the end of the movie, like you said, Steve, her place in society is sort of the answer to the whole movie is, oh, well, here's how the cops don't investigate this further, is because they think of her as this silly old lady who's always coming and talking nonsense. But at the end, she can't even get them to come in and like look at all the money that she got, so I do think that is like a perfect kind of farce ending, where it's like
totally
she kind of ends up winning even though she didn't really know what the game was that she was playing. But what did you think of Miss Wilberforce, Ronald?
She was a force, man. I mean, like there's I love when movies cast older people rather than trying to put makeup on people, because there's movements that people miss. There's a slowness that people miss. It's not because they can't move fast. It's just sometimes they just take it easy,
Mm-hmm.
Like my grandma could always grab me from wherever I was, she was pretty quick. And I think about that sometimes. It's just, it wasn't necessarily that she was not paying attention. She expects people to be good people.
Right.
It's like a thing. It's just it's not that she was a dumb person. Like you just expect people to be decent, and then she expected them until it got to a point where she couldn't think that couldn't kind of put that veil over it. So yeah, I thought what she was doing was really, when she was annoying them, when the guy was in the room and just broke the record because he was so frustrated that she tried to kill them by mistake. It's like with the bird. That scene was so good, man. Great movie. I really enjoyed it.
I also think we've mentioned them getting picked off one by one, but I think the unceremonious way that Professor Marcus goes out is so great. That like after this whole thing, he's just killed his last competition for the money, and then like that railroad sign, whatever that is, signal thing comes down and just bonk, conks him on the head, instantly falls dead, done. It's not even like it gets a fanfare. It's just like gonk, nope, you're done. I kind of remember the Coen brothers did a similar thing with their movie, and it was maybe one of the better parts of that movie was just how once things turn, how quickly the band of criminals kind of wipes themselves out. But I just love that moment of like, here's this guy's moment of triumph, and the movie doesn't even let it last for like 5 seconds really before it just conk. But that shows you what they were all about, and then of course at the end, the little gag of her this time, she's like, I never really liked that umbrella anyway, I can buy as many as I want now. I thought that was a fun little last tag. But and the camera work and the direction, this is just a very sophisticated movie of its time. It's the kind of movie that we complain we don't see a lot of now, which is that kind of like, mid-budget comedy where they're putting some real effort into making a comedy work. But I really appreciated the combination of sets and green screen and shooting in the real world. I thought this was a visually interesting movie too, which again, sometimes you don't think. Sometimes you feel like interesting camera work was invented in the 70s or something like that. And that's just not true,
Right.
Yeah. So no, I was, it probably won't be the last time I require us to watch something that goes back a little bit, because I enjoyed dipping into it as well.
Cool.
The Ladykillers. Right. Where did you guys watch it, by the way? I watched it on Amazon.
Amazon. You
Kino
found it in the wind, Ronald?
Studio Canal 4K restoration. Okay. You asked, I told you. I didn't want to say anything.
Yeah.
God damn it. And it looked good.
Yeah. I was just wondering so the people know how accessible this is.
Yes. Studio Canal also has a streaming service that offers it as well. So if you want to see it in its restored state, like you could just watch it on their streaming service, Studio Canals or Amazon.
And the way that Amazon gives you little subscriptions you can use, there is BFI Player Classics. That's BFI.
Oh, cool.
With the free trial of that, you can watch those other Ealing comedies that I mentioned, and some more. You can see a lot of stuff on there. So I would say this seems like it's going to be a week-long trial that I'm actually gonna use. Cool.
So cool. Whose pick is it now?
Well, I think next is you, Ronald, because the last one.
Yeah.
Oh, right. What do Quentin Tarantino and a shirtless Isaac Hayes have to do? What's the correlation between the two of those? A shirtless Isaac Hayes and Quentin Tarantino.
Isaac Hayes.
It's a weird one. So it's
No, honestly, I mean, I'm sure I'm gonna go, oh, I can't believe I didn't think of that. But yeah.
Okay. So Truck Turner is a film that came out in the 70s that I've never seen,
Oh.
and I've heard it referenced constantly. But what makes it really special is Quentin Tarantino took some unreleased tracks from the soundtrack and also the main theme and just stuck it into Kill Bill as an homage
Okay.
to Isaac Hayes. So my pick is Truck Turner. I saw this documentary on Netflix. What the hell is the name of it? So it's black enough. So it ain't black enough. There's a documentary on Netflix about blaxploitation. You should look it up. Really, really good. But what it got me to thinking was I always see this preview of a shirtless Isaac Hayes with a gun. And I'm like, what fucking movie is this? Truck Turner. I've never seen it in my life. And I'm going to make you guys watch a blaxploitation movie if it kills me. So
Awesome.
Cool.
And the avocado also is in it.
Yeah. So Nichelle from Star Trek is in it.
Michelle Nichols.
Yeah, Nichelle Nichols, Yaphet Kotto. Like, this is like a cool cast.
That's
and
cool.
What's even weirder is like this was a movie that was like supposedly supposed to be completely white cast, and the director was like, "No, I want to fucking make this a blaxploitation movie." And God damn it, they hired Isaac Hayes.
Yeah, Scatman Crothers, Dick Miller, Stan Shaw.
Oh wow,
pretty awesome cast.
This is gonna be a fun movie to watch because
let's do it.
I've only seen clips, and they're only been in these kind of blaxploitation documentary forms. So pretty excited about that.
Looking at the director, Jonathan Kaplan.
Yeah, so like I read on Wikipedia.
What has he done? The Accused.
Not
a whole lot.
Not a whole lot. But apparently
a bunch of TV stuff, but a lot of ER.
Wow.
All right, let's do it.
It looks like he did Project X. The
Project X
with Matthew Broderick from the
right. Yeah, with Helen Hunt.
Yeah, and the little chimpanzee.
Yeah.
So interested, man.
Okay.
Cool.
And what year?
Oh God.
74.
74. All right, cool.
Yeah. I've been trying to keep it like I really wanted to keep it kind of before the 80s. It's like what could it be? Something I haven't seen at all. Truck fucking Turner. I've been thinking about it a lot actually, because I've been thinking about these guys that kind of in a space where they couldn't really do much, achieved all this amazing, success.
Mm-hmm.
He did an entire soundtrack, and his voice is so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I miss him, and I miss his voice on South Park. It's like, what? I miss it so much. Yeah, cool. So, what else have we? What are we?
Andor.
Well, we're finally gonna do Andor. We you and I finally finished it, Ronald. John's been patiently waiting for us.
Patiently waiting.
This has been this was like one of those things where it's like I got so far behind on it. It was just like I'm gonna just wait and watch it all at once. And last week, I think, John, you mentioned like you were curious if like kind of the slow build of the show, or you made some comment about like how
I said I didn't know if binging would work with, because the slow burn build definitely week to week was working for me.
Right.
I didn't know if binging would emphasize the slowness of it, or if it would make it kind of more engrossing, like a good book or something like that. So yeah, maybe I should just ask you, what did you think of Tony Gilroy's extended version of a Star Wars story?
I mean, the answer, quickly with the binging piece, I feel like it made me entirely engrossed in watching episode to episode.
That's great.
I felt very inclined to just go right on to the next one, like instead of waiting for the next day or the next moment I might have time to watch it. But in general, I gotta say, this is probably my favorite Star Wars thing I've seen in a long time.
Same.
And I feel like probably think, something like Force Awakens for me was probably, is probably the thing I've liked the most. And mainly because of how entertaining it was, and even earlier mentioning, Harrison Ford and those moments that movie offers. But I guess as a different kind of thing, as something not kind of entirely building off of that legacy stuff, with us having met Cassian Andor in Rogue One, and that film, itself being kind of a prequel to Episode 4. But it's like, I love the idea of, a movie like this, or a show like this rather, feeling like, kind of feels like three movies, in a sense, or 3.5 movies. And this more than any of the other Star Wars shows, with the exception of maybe The Mandalorian, but this is just far and beyond, like, in terms of scope, scale, budget, like the way it looks, the way it moves, the performances, the cast. I just feel like there's so many moving parts in this show.
The emotional stakes are huge
so
too.
Well.
Yeah.
Beyond even talking about the story, I'm just saying production wise, a big criticism of, some of these Star Wars movies or shows or whatever, has been production issues, production budgets, how they look on the screen, how they look on the small screen, whatever. But I just feel like, most recently having, seen discussions about Obi-Wan and, Book of Boba Fett, and, just how some of these shows have been received, I just felt like this show felt like it was entirely in a different class. Like, I would say Mandalorian is probably in the conversation too, just because of what that show has been able to accomplish for Star Wars. But I before you even talk about the story, and like the emotional stakes and, like, my attachment to the story, I just felt like watching this show felt like what I guess you'd imagine watching a Star Wars universe show would look like, more than any show that I think they've made. Like the scope of, like, just the characters and the costumes, and like seeing the different locations and the geography of the galaxy, and seeing new areas and things like that we hadn't seen, and, like, the idea of Ferrix becoming like this base station of this whole season, and and the importance of that town to this story, or to Cassian's story, I just thought was so well handled. And I love the idea of kind of how they made I think with the exception of an episode, as a one-off, but, like, how these episodes were, like, 2 or 3 of them were done by the same writer and directing combo. And, like, it kind of felt like those arcs as it went through the story, or this season, they kind of came to a close, and as did, like, that kind of production team or whatever.
Right.
But the overall, production, show running of Tony Gilroy, and, like, he was obviously involved with Rogue One as well. But it just works so well for me. I can't, I don't want to, like, sort of sounding like superfluous or hyperbolic or anything like that, but I was so surprised how much I liked this, because I was very much disappointed in general in the Star Wars shows. I really like Mandalorian a lot. It's very entertaining, but there was something about this show, this season of this show, that on multiple times, like, really got me in the gut, and made me care way more about characters that I thought. And we talked about this a few times on this podcast, like this idea of, like, prequel series and staying in this world that we've already kind of seen the ending of,
right,
in some ways. Like, how will they effectively make it work? And this is an example of how to effectively do it. Like, it's like they have all this motion happening. And yeah, man, I loved it. I thought it was so good.
Ronald?
I've kind of said this a million times, but Rogue One is probably one of my favorite Star Wars things I've ever seen, for a very specific reason that is very specific to my experiences, and I'll try to let you guys know. Star Wars has always been very hard for me to take in. One of the reasons is there's always this talk of oppression and all this stuff happening, but as a person who's had a million cops around them, that doesn't scare me. So, like, that as a force on screen has never been scary to me. Ground level oppression is something that it took for me to see, to understand why you would be so hateful towards the Empire, why you would be people being taken out, people being hurt. And it wasn't until Rogue One that I saw that depicted in a way that felt real. Because I can't understand the way that they were describing it, and then they showed a couple people marching, and somebody, an innocent person getting shot from time to time. It wasn't until Rogue One where you see people on the ground level really being hurt and oppressed, and a group of bandits coming together to make something happen, that I really understood what any of this was for. I was literally suspending. My disbelief was never suspended until Rogue One. And that's one thing that was very important to me when I got into Andor. I'm like, is this energy going to feel the same? Because this is the way I felt with Rogue One. Because like I'd never felt that with Star Wars before.
Right.
Andor, like I was downtown when the uprising happened, and I came outside and there were tanks. And there were people with AK-47s and soldiers in the street and stuff like that. And, there's a couple of scenes that feel like that felt like that. How you feel helpless when you're in a place where you don't have control. I never had to imagine that world because it exists for me in some ways. So like this is like, if you want to get somebody's attention outside of the like nerds and stuff like that, or whatever the nerdy fan base is, this is how you get them. These cool, intimate stories that capture things that feel real. That's how it works. It's not because it's Star Wars. It's because it's good storytelling that happens to be in this world. And that's all I wanted. That's all I've ever wanted. I didn't want them to lean so much on just the name. It felt like they're just like, hey, we're Star Wars. Star Wars, we make good stuff. But this is like a different thing. This is not even, I don't even consider this like the same ilk that the other stuff came from. Obviously, it had to exist to come, right? The tree had to exist for the fruit to come. But this is some different shit, man. It struck me in a way that I never thought that I'd ever be touched. When there's one scene where he's being told, what his mom said to him, what she'd expect him to say when getting to this place, that like I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen this acting level like it. I kind of wish that they'd hire him to be Scarface, by the way. He was like up for being Scarface. I hope if they make Scarface again that he's going to be cast. But everybody working on all cylinders. You're supposed to hate the guys you hate, and you're supposed to love the people you love. And here's the last thing I'm going to say. Love is all we have. There's like this thing, there's like this theme. It feels like the world is going through something where it's like it's really intense. And the lesson for this show seems to be like, love is all we have. Love is the love of each other, the love of our causes, the love of freedom, the love of, and whatever that feels like for you. I don't have many things that make me feel like that like remind me of the things that are important to me. And Andor hit me on all chords, man. Like it like struck me. Catastrophic sounds bad. It had a very big impact on me. And I'm glad that I watched it. I'm glad that
Monumental.
And I'm glad you kept mentioning it, because I don't think I would have watched it.
Well, go ahead.
Last thing I'm going to say, I cut off all my devices and watched it, which is really important. I'm starting to do that now. I'm starting to be like engaged. I'm turning off all my technology. I'm ignoring things. I'm ignoring the lights, closing laptops. I just took it in, man.
I put my phone. I know this sounds like a stupid thing to say. Yeah. I will make a point of putting my phone on the charger across the room, put my earbud back in the charger across, and then I sit down to watch a show. And I do that now if I'm trying to read something now too. I'm not kidding myself. For years, I've been kidding myself that I can have like constant input, and I almost need noise, like in order to sit down with something. And I'm trying to remove that need of because I'll put on a show so that I can start reading something, or so that I'll put on a podcast and put it on as background instantly and start doing something else. And it's like, why do I need that? It's like I'm afraid to be alone with my thoughts. And sometimes
Yeah.
you do have to sit down and watch something.
Yeah.
I want to. So much of what you guys are saying is so great to hear, because I kind of agree on a certain level with this idea that, like, Rogue One is not one of my favorite Star Wars movies, but I like it better, obviously, than it's better than bad. It's just not one of my favorites. I always felt like it was a little dry or something like that. And like maybe it had cool concepts, but not really, like, for instance, the character of Cassian Andor is one that I thought was kind of a non-starter in that movie. And now when I go back, I went back and watched Rogue One, having seen Andor, and I instantly liked Andor a lot more. I felt like I was more in for the world. I still think that world as depicted in that movie works better as a show, because what we're talking about is a world where, and I think I mentioned this last time, like, you get a conversation between two different mid-level Imperial characters, and you find out there are philosophical differences in the ranks about these people who you don't want to succeed. But you also, like Deidre, like we sort of admire her competence and her readiness for the job, even though she's horrible. Like, if she succeeds, she's horrible. And then Cyril Karn, I think is his name, is like a really funny in ways character, a black comedy kind of look at a guy who's like a climber and maybe an outsider and maybe a little bit of like a Star Wars version of kind of like an incel kind of guy or something. But he's fixated on this woman, and they obviously have this kind of power dynamic going, and it's funny, and it's a little bit dark, and it feels psychologically real. And these are two Imperials on a show that's carving out a piece of the timeline that we sort of think we already know. And somehow it's the most interesting Star Wars has been in forever. It's probably the best dialogue. I mean, I do think Lawrence Kasdan, who has written his fair share of Star Wars, he has a magic touch. He wrote Empire. He co-wrote, I believe, Return of the Jedi. He co-wrote The Force Awakens. He co-wrote Solo. Those are the movies that probably have the most crackling, fun, funny dialogue. I know people like to beat on Solo, but the one thing I think you can't argue with is that Lawrence Kasdan understands what's funny about Han Solo and knows how to make that kind of like sarcasm in the moment of something exciting, how to make that like both funny as a viewer and also an obvious defense mechanism for someone who's got wounds that they're trying to hide. You know, I just think that that character is great. But I think this and Solo, oddly enough, Andor and Solo are the two things that I would say as a Star Wars fan, outside of, as you said, Steve, the excitement of The Force Awakens coming out and just having new Star Wars and it feeling good again. But like, if you were to say, what do you want from Star Wars? Solo is a good indication of what I want. I want silly, swashbuckling fun with wild scenarios. And the other thing I want is Andor. I want, like, let's dig in. Let's show, like you said, Ronald, like, okay, we've never really seen the ground level of what the Empire does to people before. We've seen it blow up planets. We've seen the tanks come rolling in and the big, people carriers moving in, but we haven't seen like what it means to just live under the Empire and to realize that your options are being whittled away and to be on this planet. I didn't check, but I swear we didn't see a stormtrooper for like 3 or 4 episodes. Once they start showing up, they show up. But it's like even the Imperial uniforms, the first couple episodes, we're dealing with these guys who are like security on Ferrix, but not necessarily Imperials. Not to say that we're not seeing that. I'm just saying that like they really paid off that idea of we're stripping away familiar stuff. We're stepping away from Skywalkers. We're stepping away from Jedis. We're stepping away from even from Darth Vader. We're saying like the Imperials you're going to get in this show are these military folks and like middle manager types, not Jedis and Sith and everything. It feels cool. It feels real. It feels grounded. And it really had me realizing I'd never thought about, like I said, what the Empire does on the ground level, but also what the Rebellion was doing on the ground level. I always thought the Rebellion was cool. It never occurred to me the level of personal bravery that each individual person had to have for people to say, we're going to take on the Empire. We're going to take on the air we breathe. We're going to take on the company. We're going to take on the man. I mean, like you said, Ronald, it's always been kind of talk. It's been part of the rhetoric because we've been at the swashbuckling part of the story. But in a way, this is the part of the story that could be no fun if it weren't. And honestly, like I've said, I don't want them to keep going into smaller and smaller pieces of a timeline that they've dealt with. But if we thought that Mandalorian was refreshing just because it stepped away a little bit from the bigger mythos, all it's done as it's moved on is get more and more entangled in the bigger mythos by bringing in Luke and bringing in Ahsoka and bringing in all these characters. And then as much as we love Grogu, as much as we love Mando, that show started with okay, it's Boba Fett, but it's not Boba Fett. And his best friend is a baby Yoda, but it's not Yoda. You know, like Andor actually does feel like it's doing something different. It's that thing they say all the time. Oh, new creators, new storytellers are going to get to play in this sandbox.
Yeah.
Andor really feels like that. Andor really feels like Tony Gilroy getting to bring his aesthetic, a guy who admittedly doesn't revere Star Wars. And he gets to do what you just said, Ronald. He gets to put some meat on the bone of the story, the saga that needs that if it's going to continue. Because as we've seen, the nostalgia for the old days and the Skywalkers and the Jedi, it's cool. We love it, but it's going to be diminishing returns if the stories aren't there, if the characters aren't popping.
Yeah.
And I think Diego Luna has been like amazing in this. I think Stellan Skarsgård has been amazing. I think the scenes with Saw Gerrera, as Forrest Whitaker, amazing. I wish I could pull her name off the top of my head, but I'm going to have to look. The actress that's playing Mon Mothma, what's her name? Genevieve O'Reilly. She's great. Fiona Shaw as Marva. I don't know the actor that's doing the voice of B2 Emo, the droid, but he's the most heartbreaking droid in the whole saga. Yeah. Everything about this show just feels like they're doing something, like you said, Steve, something kind of special. Like they're really making every scene kind of feel different. And the little mini arcs. We got a great prison storyline. We got a great, like, he's part of a heist storyline. And then the last 2 episodes are dealing with this inevitable conflagration of all the elements. I thought it brought things together beautifully in the last moment of the season. To know that we're not going to get more of this character for 2 years, but this is where they want to leave us. The notion that he's basically saying to this man that's kind of manipulated him and used him, like he's either saying like, use me or kill me.
Or kill me. Yeah.
It's fantastic. I just thought that was so adult and deep and real. And yet we also see that Andor is a wounded character who's casting about. Like he needs somebody to mentor him at this point. And I think it's really interesting that Luthen is going to be the guy that does that. You know what I mean? Like here's a guy who we've seen. The tragedy of Luthen is that he's that guy who says, like, I'm never going to get to reap the benefits of the work I'm doing. I'm going to be misunderstood and hated by people. And even there's a scene where he's kind of standing at a distance watching the battle happening on Ferrix. And he's like, I got to get out of town. And it's a tragic moment, I thought, to see him like, well, this is what I wanted. It's happening. Now let me go back into the shadows so I can manipulate things a little bit more. We know that it's wearing on him, that he's got this role and he's this character. So I feel like that last moment with Andor really feels like a great place to leave those characters, because you know that that's something that means something not just to Andor but to Luthen, you know?
Yeah. It also feels like all the characters mattered, like from the character Termin to like you see this guy that's like, it felt like he was like kind of he was like a stormtrooper. I thought he was gonna live. Then he gets killed.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, this is what the whole point of this is. Like, Andor wouldn't have felt the way that he did unless he saw the things that he saw, unless he got these people that, like, if you found out you were pro movement, that they were willing to lose their lives for this movement. You know, that's like everybody mattered. Everybody on the screen mattered. All those people mattered. And there's something really cool about that. I didn't feel like that about anything else that I had seen in this TV world, but they did it.
I mean, definitely in the TV world. I mean, this is like the deepest they've gone.
Definitely.
And I mean, the show benefits from, you know, being afforded the ability to do that because of the franchise that it's in, you know, so, you know, everything that Ronald's saying that you said, John, like, I totally agree with it, but I think the scope of this show only exists because of the success of Rogue One and, you know, because of what they're doing with Disney Plus. You know, like this kind of show, like whether if it wasn't Star Wars, you know, probably would never exist with the scope and talent and, you know, credentials that this show carries. But, you know, the Star Wars is kind of like of it all is what kind of even allows it to be. And I love the idea of, yes, being able to see the ground, you know, like boots on the ground. You know, people said that about Rogue One a lot, you know, that idea of what the rebellion looks like or what the rebels look like. But then the show is, like, you know, able to go even more granular, you know, and see kind of how one thing that I really loved about it was, like, you got to see more of how interconnected, you know, the machinations of the Rebel Alliance,
Yeah.
what they had in place, you know, where this information was coming from, you know, and how these things were being put into play, like a character like Luthen, you know, being able to play sides of, you know, two sides of the coin so well. And, you know, the idea of even seeing members of the Rebel Alliance working for the Empire, you know, like these characters that even if they wanted to get out, you know, they couldn't get out because like they were too deep into it at this point. Like the one officer that visits him and, you know, you see him working with Deirdre and everything.
Yeah.
I just thought all that stuff was like great that you know, you kind of got to see a little bit more of that because it's cool to see how, I don't want to say how powerful they were, but like how like deep, how like deeply they had dug into the different systems around, you know, that they could access. Like I loved how the show handled revealing those kinds of things. And yeah,
like the real purpose of what they were building in the prison too. That even that like, had a point to it. Like sure. Part of this almost like cosmic joke of this story of what Andor's doing and how connected to everything he is. You know,
right? And I don't know. It's the more it sat with me as I was going along. It's just like there's so much story in this season of a show for Star Wars, which seems so sorely lacking, you know, of great story,
right?
You know, in years past. And I mean, especially when you talk, you know, enough about the trilogy, the most recent trilogy, like, you know, a lack of a cohesive story,
right?
You know, to see in this season, you know, you kind of feel like you got like 3 mini movies that were just, and that were all great. You know, you got this first 3 episodes of, you know, what's happening on Ferrix, and you got him, you know, being detained and the whole Andy Serkis arc and all that
Andy
stuff.
Serkis getting a second at bat in the Star Wars universe too is great.
And then, you know, the last 4 or 5 episodes kind of bringing us to the end. Like, it just, I don't know, man. It was so impressive. I was so happy that the buzz around it did not let me down, and that, you know, I was as into it as I was. And you mentioned it. The last thing I will say is, like, you mentioned it already, sort of, John, is like the writing on the show is just incredible, you know. And I don't want to even say for a Star Wars show, it's just incredible for period. A lot of the stuff between Marva and Cassian, like that stuff really knocked me out.
And her speech, like, her speech in the last episode, the hologram speech, was incredible.
Yeah, that was amazing.
The fact that she's literally made into a brick, her ashes are made into a brick that then gets used to smash an Imperial's head.
Yeah,
and I loved Brasso, that character who kind of emerges more importantly in the end. I thought he was great. No, yeah, you're right. I mean, honestly, the dialogue, the writing, that's the big part of it. As someone who's loved this saga, this story since I was a kid, to say, oh, no one's ever written Star Wars dialogue like that before, you know. Like I've said, Lawrence Kasdan has got the fun, quippy, fast-paced, zingy dialogue covered, but to be able to slow down and tell this kind of lengthy story, slow burn storyline, and get all these interesting conversations in, where it's like, normally I don't like that kind of thing, the kind of high-minded conversations about what it means to rebel or whatever, but these characters are actually dealing with that stuff in a tangible way. And like, for instance, the Mon Mothma stuff, I found it really interesting trying to picture, like, oh, how does she have to maneuver to be the person we see later? Like her bravery and intelligence is so interesting too, but she was kind of almost in a holding pattern all season, and yet I found her incredibly interesting every time we cut to her world, the way that her husband is not really on her side,
or her daughter, maybe
the way that she may have to the way that she may have to deal with the criminal underworld and maybe use her daughter as some kind of collateral to get the money she needs to help the rebellion. I mean, that's just complexity that, you know, they haven't had. Like, they've had complexity in gray areas in Star Wars characters before, but they haven't had this ability to dig in and show you the inner workings of it, not just the characters, but you kind of alluded to this, Steve, like the systems, the social systems, how things work. What, you know, how like in The Force Awakens, when Rey comes back and she makes herself a meal, and we see like for a second, like, oh, that's what it looks like when you make a meal on Star Wars. I feel like this show is full of that, of like, that's what an apartment looks like. That's what a breakfast table looks like in Star Wars.
That's what a shower looks like.
And it's like, and to think we have
the morning after looks like.
Oh, honestly. Well, I mean, let's talk about the fact that this feels a little adult in that way. Like, you know, this is a character who gets around in that way, and you don't, it doesn't slow down to make you think about it. It's just kind of part of it. And there's a few characters who have like attachments that feel like there's a There's something underneath the surface with them.
I was like, they have resorts.
I know. Oh, I love the resort town. I love the resort town, and I can't wait till we actually meet the K2SO droid that we know, because I think that's going to be a fun moment. And again, you can see they've said the next season is really going to take more time jumps, and it's going to have more like missions to do with the rebellion, and we're going to see K2SO at some point. And we're also going to see, like they said, someone pointed out there weren't a lot of alien races in this, non-humanoids. And they said that's very deliberate, that as he gets more involved in the rebellion, and that as the rebellion gets bigger, you'll see more diversity of the alien races. And I got little goosebumps going, well, of course that would make sense. You're on this little backwater planet, and eventually you're going to be connected to the whole galaxy, that's beautiful. So I'm super excited about not just the notion that we're going to get a second season, probably in a couple of years, but knowing that they had this 24 chapter story somewhat planned out, and we just got half of it, and it was that solid. I have full faith that they're going to get us there, because keep in mind, like Andor in Rogue One, he starts that movie a guy who will shoot you if it's convenient.
Yeah.
So it's not like this is the story of a guy who becomes who chills out. This is the story of a guy who learns how to be a tool of the rebellion rather than just a tool for whoever pays him, and that's a really cool idea. And again, Diego Luna, we cannot talk much about. I mean, he carries this show so effortlessly. He's been so good for so long, but this is such a good, everybody working on it, you can see why they got so invested in it. And kind of what you said, Steve, maybe the fact that this was a little sideline thing, they were kind of quietly doing a follow-up to Rogue One with this, it did allow it maybe to become its own thing. So by the time it came out, there was a space. People knew that they kind of needed to do something that felt a little more adult. And to say good writing for Star Wars, you're right. We've said all along about Marvel and Star Wars shows, whenever they touch something that feels like the prestige television we watch in other avenues, it's special. And this show actually feels like a prestige. In my opinion, it feels like a prestige television show. I totally agree with
you. Absolutely. Sure, man. Ronnie, you mentioned something earlier when you first given your reaction. I think you would said something about just the idea of love, and where it is in this story. And I just, the way they really kind of focused on that with the relationship with Cassian and Marva. I don't know why it stuck with me so much after seeing the episode. But it's kind of bookended a little bit towards the end when Brazo's kind of is that his name? When he's reading him the letter that she gave him or told him what to tell Cassian. But there's a scene earlier when he comes back for her after the Aldani mission, and she's telling him that she can't go with him and he can't stay. And he says, I'm looking it up. It was like a line. He said, "I won't have peace. I'll be worried about you all the time." And she says, "That's just love. Nothing you can do about that." And then at the end, and in that exchange, she tells him, I've never loved anything the way I love you. And at the end, when he's reading her, or when he's telling him when Brazo is telling Cassian what he was told to tell him by Marva, the last line was to tell him, "I love him more than anything he could ever do wrong." And
such a mom thing to say.
That sentiment, though.
Yeah,
it is a mom thing to say.
Yeah.
But her role in that town, her role in the rebellion, and to follow that with the scene of her speech to the town, and man, that whole role right there just gave me cold chills. From the moment they have that conversation about her, the ability that they had to make that character, kind of the synthesis for what Cassian is, because she basically saved him in from a planet that was being destroyed.
Yeah.
To kind of give her that bookend and kind of maintain the impact that she had on the people of the town.
Yeah.
And to see the respect that she was paid in her memorial and all this stuff, that moment would be the moment that town would rise up.
Yeah.
And fight. That was just amazing.
It's awesome. He takes all these pieces of all that stuff. When I guess is this her partner? They don't really say who the other guy, the black dude is.
That I don't know. It
is that
seems
not Clem?
Because
It seems
Clem. When he's like in
okay.
the house, he's talking about don't tell
Yeah,
Marva
I
that we
love
do
that
this in the house.
I love that he named himself Clem when he's doing the undercover thing. But,
I know,
Yeah.
and he did that before we found out. You know, that's one of those little
Yes.
things that just
Yeah.
felt like a name, and then we find out why he
Yeah.
would use that name. It's so
when he's,
so
when he's
potent.
washing the pieces, and he's like, "These things are worth 500 credits." He's like, "That's what me and you do. We find." I mean, paraphrasing. We find rusty things, and we know they're valuable. Like, come on, man.
Okay,
Like this,
and how brilliant was the addition of I think Nemec was the character's name, but the manifesto that we heard, like some of the stuff he was saying, that feels like some of the best writing ever about like the nature of, you were talking about oppression and oppressors, and it talks about and you know, there's that great scene even with Andy Serkis and Diego Luna where Kino Loy is telling him, like, basically you sound crazy saying that like we could do this, we could take these guards on and everything. He says, and Cassian says, like, they just killed this whole floor of men just to keep this quiet. What does that sound like to you? And Kino Loy says, I'd call that power. And Cassian says, power doesn't panic.
Yeah.
What?
Dude.
Excuse me?
Man, and like that's the sign that the Empire could be taken down, is that they don't, I mean, and that's what's part of that stuff from the manifesto. But just that line, power doesn't panic. I mean, there's so many little lines like that. And I feel like there was some other stuff. I wish I could remember some quotes from the kind of speech that we heard, but it had just some lines like that just made me think, like, this has got such intelligent things to say about the very thing that Star Wars is about, which is about like rising up and what it means and why you need to take this system down. And I don't know.
He made some comment in the manifesto about like how unnatural it was.
Yes.
Like how it's constantly like fighting to maintain how unnatural the hold it has over, like, I mean, it was great. I mean, you mentioned Circus again, that scene when they finally take the room and he's telling him to talk to the men.
Come on.
And like encouraging him to like rally them.
Yeah,
that was phenomenal.
It was
like,
really
I
good.
was so pumped up listening to him, like when he was like lighting up on that loudspeaker and like kind of coming into what he wanted to say, even though he was kind of scared.
He was there.
That was amazing.
Cassian does that to everybody.
You're right.
That thing. Okay, so one thing, Andy Serkis is doing something that I just haven't seen before. Like that progression of the energy that he had was amazing, right? It's like, stay in line. I'm going to get through this sentence, you know? And then when he realizes that it's not going to happen and that you go to another prison instead of being free. Oh my God, man.
They made the mistake of sending someone back into the same prison and then had to kill all these guys to cover it up for it. And I got to say, one of the best scenes in the whole season, and therefore one of the best scenes in all of Star Wars, is a quiet scene in the hallway with that doctor.
Doctor,
I bought that guy so much. There was some great casting of characters like that who look like a character actor from the 70s. That's something Rogue One did a lot. Was like cast background characters that look like 70s guys, and it just feels more like Star Wars. But that guy, when he was like, I don't want to know his name. Oh, God. Like, and like he had a better end than we're about to have, all that stuff, and the way he has to like send the guard away so he can whisper a few things about what's going on, but he's had it. And seeing that guy part of the escape later was cool, because it's like, oh, it's cool to see that even that guy can be part of this. Kino Loy not being able to escape because he can't swim is horribly tragic. And the fact that this show just moves on and says, you know, you may come back to him, you may not, but the notion of the last moment we see him, it's a sort of, it's another reflection of that, a person who plants a tree whose shade they're never going to get to sit in.
Yeah.
And also observation about that character, you guys were talking about it, like the way that his belief in this system is just, we're going to get out. All we got to do is, I want everybody to make it to the day they get out. Okay, they're not going to let us out. Okay, that changes everything. The simplicity of that line at the end of that episode when they're walking back and he says, how many guards do they have on each level? And he says, I don't know, there's something just badass.
12,
but it's not just that. It's the way Andy Serkis says, never more than 12.
Yeah.
And it goes to black, and it's like the end of that episode. And I just got goosebumps. I was like, how is never more than 12? It reminds me of like on Breaking Bad, when like a very simple line, or Better Call Saul, when a simple line becomes a badass line because of the context of it. And Andy Serkis saying never more than 12 is one of my favorite little bits in this thing. So yeah, it's full of little things like that. I found the excerpt, by the way, guys. Here's the thing that's great. The imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks, it leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear, and it knows this. The day will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance, will have flooded the banks of the empire's authority, and then there will be one too many. One single thing will break the siege. Remember this. Try.
Yep, that's it.
I need that book. I need that.
Yeah.
Jesus.
I mean, there's people that
you
say
can probably buy it on StarWars.com.
There are people that have pointed out, is that what Andor's wearing? He's wearing a little book in Rogue One that might be like. I mean, that sounds like the kind of thing where maybe they filled in a detail that I don't know if that was intentional, but the idea that meant something to him is really cool. Anyway,
that'd be cool if it was.
Yeah. Well, obviously we're fans. We like Andor.
Yeah, I mean, this is there were a couple of things throughout the season that were kind of like a little off for me. Like it's not. I don't know that it's perfect, but it's just I mean, I think that it's definitely one or two for me of like the last 10 years of the newness in terms of Star Wars.
Yeah,
it's really no contest. I mean, I do really enjoy and love The Mandalorian for kind of different reasons. But though, that would probably be up in the conversation too. But I just think that this show is something special. And I think that it really is an example of something that Disney Plus or Disney Lucasfilm can look at and be like, okay, this is what we need to do more of. And, mix and match some other, elements. But I mean, like the quality is really what you're talking about or what we're all talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
It looked great as well.
But real sets, none of that volume stuff with everything being a CGI set, or at least very limited use of that.
Again, mix that up if you want. But I mean, like have a balance, like some of the volume stuff is amazing, but overdoing it is very clear and very obvious in certain situations.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, whatever they were afforded to do on this show is probably not what they can do with every show. So, find a balance. Yeah. But the quality of writing, and mentioned it, John, it's just like, it just makes it's just like, it just makes everything so much better. I mean, it sounds dumb to say, but I mean, it's like the focus on the spectacle and like the characters, the legacy. You can't stand on that only for so long. And like, it's been wavering. And I feel like this is a show that truly has like just been like a shot of adrenaline for me. Like I'm so
new
excited
chips to cash in, because they've cashed in the nostalgia chips at this point. They totally have. But here's some new chips to cash in for sure.
Yeah, can't wait for 2 years or whenever it comes out next. I would love to see more of this world and these characters as soon as possible.
All right.
Same.
Did you guys watch anything else? Oh, really quick, just to mention, the first season of Andor obviously is all out on Disney Plus if you haven't watched it or if you're catching up. Hopefully we didn't spoil too much if you haven't watched it, but definitely a recommend all around. Definitely go check out. And it's 12 episodes. So carve out some time and enjoy yourself some Andor season 1. So sorry. Did you guys
you can do it watch it the Steve way, which is to think you've got 10 episodes and then you get 2 bonus episodes at the end.
What's weird? Like when I was following it all on social media, it seemed like everything like peaked after episode 10.
It did.
And like Tony Gilroy was doing all these interviews and all the actors were doing interviews. And I was like, oh, okay, it's 10 episodes. Like the season's over. And then I got to the end of 10 and was like, maybe it's over. Is there more? And I was like, oh yeah, there's 2 more. But just what I'm confirming, there's 12.
Yeah.
If you're watching it on Disney Plus like a normal person and watching the numbers go up, you'll see 12. But I just in my mind, for some reason, dog-eared like 10 because everybody was talking so much after 10. But whatever. A lot happened in episode 10. But
yes. No, it was the end of one of those arcs, and it could have felt like a season finale.
Go find it. It's great. It's some of the best Star Wars in a long time. So what else have you guys watched? Is there anything you wanted to mention? I didn't mean to cut you go off. Ronald, you maybe were about to mention something.
No, I really haven't been watching them. No.
I would just mention that I saw Glass Onion, but I don't have much to say that I shouldn't just wait until you guys have seen it, but it's that movie you've been waiting for, folks. If you want that movie with the star power and the laughs and the big moments, and that feels a little bit like it's ripped from the headlines. It feels like it was all written in the last month or so, based on the kind of targets that it's taken on.
Oh, wow.
But I mean, like Knives Out was such fun. So if you are thinking, did they come back and do one of those sequels that's kind of like, oh, the first one, but a little bigger and a little more? This is that movie. So, if you want more of that flavor, and if you like that swagger when people make a sequel to a thing that they didn't know they would ever get a sequel to, but they did because it's so successful, like this is that. It just has that feel. Daniel Craig is having a blast. The whole cast is having a blast. Who pops up and when they pop up and how they pop up. This is a movie that has a lot of fun with like cameos and with, again, just the goodwill that people have, I think, towards not just this movie specifically, but like this type of star-driven kind of mid-budget movie that isn't a franchise. Well, I mean, it's a part of a franchise now, but it's not part of a pre-existing IP.
Sure.
It feels like everybody's just there to have fun. And when I say cameos, when you see the movie, you'll know what I mean. There's a couple moments where you have to kind of know who someone is to get a joke. And the movie just keeps on rolling. So it feels very much like, I don't know, there's fun. There's something seeping through the screen with this movie that really feels like it's a symptom of how it was made and the people making it, having a blast. So,
yeah. I'm one of the ones that didn't see it in its 1 week run. So I've been waiting for a movie like you said, like this, but I guess I'll wait till December 23rd when it comes out on Netflix to finally see it. I was hoping to try to go to the theater to see it. It didn't happen, but yeah, those that saw it seemed like they overwhelmingly loved it. It's crazy how well it performed too.
Like, leaving money on the table, right? Like not leaving it in theaters.
Tons of money.
Okay.
Lots of money.
And there's conversations now I'm reading about like that. They're considering maybe putting it back in theaters, which should be like but not before the Netflix premiere. I don't know. It's weird.
Sloppy.
They botched the whole thing. But yeah, I mean, it did like crazy money in 600 theaters and change or whatever, but like it was number 3 for the week. And it was like, it's one of the ones you thought maybe they would break the mold and go a little deeper with a theatrical run. I don't think it would have had much of an impact on Netflix, but with their debut on Netflix rather. But right. Yeah, I can't wait to see it. And it'll be here soon, thankfully.
Yeah.
Moviesmovie.com is the website. If you want to find the podcast there, you can subscribe to the show on any podcast platform that you prefer. You can listen to episodes right on that site. In addition, you can go to youtube.com/movie podcast if you want to subscribe to the video portion of the podcast. And make sure you hit the subscribe, like button to get the notifications when the videos come out. And next week, what was your pick again? Require View? What's it called? Truck Turner. 1974's Truck Turner.
Can't wait.
Which I have no idea where that's going to be found, but we'll probably post some videos between now and then, letting people know where to find it if they want to watch along with it.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Good seeing you both. And as always, you've made our day. Thanks.
Bye.